Hi there, and welcome to the Educators Corner podcast, the show that brings you conversations with educators from all over the world. Conversations where we stay curious for a little bit longer about the issues, challenges, and opportunities which we are facing in our schools and in our communities. Today, we're going to get curious about education reform, innovation, and AI with Priya Lakhani, OBE, founder and CEO of Century Tech, an AI-driven education technology company. A former barrister, Priya transitioned into entrepreneurship, launching Masala Masala, a fresh cooking sauce business, which also provided millions of meals and thousands of vaccinations to the underprivileged in India and Africa before founding Century Tech in 2014. Priya's entrepreneurial and government advisory work earned her an OBE, and her AI and education work over the last decade has resulted in numerous accolades, including recognition as a World Economic Forum tech pioneer. Priya was also a member of the UK government's AI Council and co-founded the Institute for Ethical AI in Education, advocating for ethical AI use in learning environments. A bit more about that later, I would think. Priya is a regular commentator on global news outlets and appears on BBC News to discuss current affairs. Welcome to the Educators Corner podcast, Priya. How are you doing?
Thanks so much. Thank you. I'm great, thank you. How are you, Kai?
I'm doing very well. It's pretty hot here in Oman, but it is actually starting to cool down a bit. How's the weather in London today?
It's cloudy. Cloudy. We've had a very short summer, but I have hope. I have hope for a late sort of burst of Indian summer at some point.
Okay.
But yeah, cloudy and a bit wet.
And a bit wet. Is that why you're wearing the baseball cap today?
It is, but I wear baseball caps all the time. I know that you aren't used to seeing me with a baseball cap on. I collect them. But yes, I've kept it on because I was just out and I got caught in a bit of sort of spitting rain. And so, yeah, I thought I didn't want to do that to you, Kai. So I'll
Okay.
cover it.
And can I ask, how's your week shaping up then?
The week is, what day is it? I don't even
Tuesday,
know
I
what-
think.
Have we had a week? That's usually what I'm like because I feel like everything runs is yeah, it's all good, all good. Week's been very very busy. Lots and lots of events because obviously the school year started up. So for us, it's a really really busy time at Century. We've got the onboarding of lots of schools for the new academic year, and then there's no shortage of AI talks and presentations, education talks and presentations, and they all tend to start up around end of September to November. So, it gets really, really busy for me around this time of year, but I really welcome it. I love it.
Okay, and it's been a very exciting time in schools. The last couple of weeks, a lot of us around the globe have been starting the school year. So it sounds like an exciting time at Century Tech. So let's go back a bit in history. I mean, you trained as a barrister. Um, how did you get involved in education? What sparked between you and the education world?
So it's not a straight line, so be prepared. um, so yes, I did train as a barrister. Then I actually quit law because I wasn't quite having the impact that I thought I would have. And I started a food company, as you mentioned. And you might think, what on earth that got to do with anything? Well, for every unit that we sold of food, we would feed a homeless person a hot meal. We would provide pentavalent vitamin 1 vaccines to children across parts of Africa. And we would fund schools. And that's because I learned that you need to give education, healthcare, and nutrition to these children to give them any chance of leaving that sort of poverty cycle that they're in. So I did that for a few years. That was great. That was, successful if you look at it. And it was, I thought I'd be doing that probably for the rest of my life at the time. And then I just happened to, as you do, you sort of just have these moments in your life where you learn something new. And I was sitting on a government advisory board, and my Secretary of State was Vince Cable. So do you remember when he was Secretary of State for
Hmm.
Business Innovation and Skills? And a minister came into the room. At the time, it was Matthew Hancock, who then became our Secretary of State for Health eventually and had other roles. And he was reporting to Vince Cable. And in one of these meetings, he comes in and he presents and he says 20% of children in the UK cannot read, write, or do maths well enough to get a job at the end of formal education. That was the statistic that was presented to us. And at the time, it was just this serendipity of all things going on in my life. But, we were funding schools in these parts of the world where we were funding slum schools. So you don't have qualified teachers teaching the children. It's members of the community or grown-up members from the slum who had sort of been educated in a way, but informally themselves, who were teaching the children with lots of sort of donated books and things like that on the streets, but on the pavements, right? Um, so I was doing that, and then I was also pregnant with my second child. So I was already interested in education from a maternal perspective.
Hmm.
And I had just had a bit of a shock. It was a bit of a wake up call. And I thought, if 20% of our nation with brick and mortar schools and professional teachers, teaching assistants, resources, if we can't achieve 100%, which I know there's lots of reasons for this, but at the time, I thought, well, if we can't do that, there's just not a chance that it's really working in the schools that I'm funding. So some of these charitable programs that I'm very focused on with Masala Masala, the food company, are they actually achieving what I think they are? Or am I just being quite naive, really, putting lots of funding into these areas, but they're not actually getting, the real outcome? And so I wanted to understand why, what's wrong with our education system? Why are 20% of kids leaving school and not getting those required outcomes? And just after just being curious, you started off with, let's be curious about this. Well, it's just about being curious all the time and asking questions. And no one could really answer the question in government. And so I went to schools, and I remember going around Habs in North West London. I remember traveling a little bit further south. I went to some state schools. I went to some that seemed quite challenged from their sort of Ofsted reports at the time. I went to some, what you would think maybe is a private school that churns out very good results. And while I could see the kids are different, the teachers are different, the website says something a bit different. Actually, when you close the door to that classroom, you could see the method of delivering education. The resources might be different quality. The teachers might have different lesson plans. I get all of that. But just at a very high level, if you were just to look at the delivery of education, actually, it was pretty similar across lots of different schools in the way in which it was delivered, right? What it is the difference, I suppose. But the delivery was the same. And I was just curious because on this smartphone of mine, this is 10 years ago, right? 10 to 12 years ago, I was getting personalized shopping recommendations. They might not be the best, but I was still getting personalized shopping recommendations. I was getting personalized sleep recommendations, personalized saving and investment recommendations. And I thought, well, if you can personalize pretty much everything that we're going to consume or the way in which we behave, why can't we personalize education? And that was essentially the start of the journey as to why I ended up feeling that it was too urgent a problem to solve, and definitely worth a lot of people's time, not just mine, but something that I really wanted to do because I want to ensure that every child has every opportunity in life, and that the people who I always say that, whenever we ask anyone who's the most important person in a school, in a classroom, undoubtedly most people just put their hands up and say it's a child, it's the child, it's the student, right? And when you ask that question in a slightly different way, you say who's the most powerful person in a classroom, it's definitely the teacher. So I looked at that and thought, right, well, how can we empower the teacher and stop wasting so much of their time? Because they spent, from my research when I was going around to these schools, they said they spent more than half of their time, say 60% of their time, marking, micro-assessing. So before they'd actually got the analysis of which children to make interventions with, they had to go and do that piece of analysis. And not every teacher is a trained analyst. It's not what they signed up to do necessarily. So how can we, work on all of these areas of the process of delivering education and make it better and empower the teacher, but while also trying to provide that very well-deserved personalised education to each student?
So what I think I'm hearing then is that if I was then trying to play back to you what I think your mission is, it sounds like you want to try and empower every teacher so they can ensure that every child is sufficiently prepared to seize every opportunity that they might have. Do you
Yeah,
recognize that? Or
that
is it?
sounds about right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Exact small
Okay.
mission, small baby step visions.
How far would you say we are from that vision. Let's say I ask you on a scale of 1 to 10. You're 10, we're absolutely there. We're pretty much knocking at the door of the vision. 0, we're nowhere near it. How far are we away from that vision, or how close are we to your vision for education?
We're really far. And the only reason I say that is because I have to take the question as the whole. And I'm thinking about the globe, right? I mean, if we're thinking about just a specific country, it would be a little bit different. And what's really interesting is that I give you that answer just globally because look, there's just so many there's such disparity when it comes to education, quality of resources, quality of the ability to actually put a professional teacher in front of students. I'm not a believer that tech is going to take over this area. I think tech will do a lot in this area. I think that technology can really empower not just the teacher, the student as well. There's so much that we could use technology for in a better way. And that, the more and more we do that, we could potentially get a bit closer to that vision. But I really am a big believer in the human and using that human side of the teacher, the human intelligence, the human empathy. I understand like Elon Musk's view of, how you can have your personal best friend will actually be a robot and all of these things, and that future sort of Star Wars view of, having your C3PO and following you around everywhere and having an emotional connection to it and it doing all your job. I get all of that, right? But I'm still a big believer in, look, actually people have very short memories. In COVID, during the pandemic, if you remember, because I remember because I was dealing with a 400% increase in people using Sentry and new countries wanting Sentry during the pandemic when we had lockdowns. Do you remember, Kai? The one thing that people wanted was for their children to be back in that peer-to-peer environment. And it was school and education, that's the point, right? It's not just about that delivery of knowledge and applying skills upon it. Education is this whole sort of holistic 360-degree experience that and moments that we give these young people. And part of that is also the interaction with the adults and the teachers and some of the self-discipline to learn how to follow a timetable. There's a lot of that, right? That I think we forget about when we talk about education. So how far are we? Well, there are just some parts of the world and some parts of even the UK that are just so far from that. And the reason why I give you that answer with confidence is because it doesn't actually come from me. It's an accumulation of everything I've heard from teachers, because they're the ones that matter. When we ask these questions, how far away do you feel? And interestingly, it's one to put back to you. You are an amazing head teacher. We've worked with you very closely. You've got teachers. I think you're in a fantastic position, but I know that what's quite interesting in some of your schools, there's a lot of resource and you're able to give lots of things to lots of children. I know also, obviously, the work that you've done aside from that, where you've reached harder demographics, you've put in place lots of different tools and technologies to be able to help in a more scaled way children who otherwise might not have that very, very international elite education. You've put in blended learning approaches. I know all the things that you've done. If you ask every teacher, how far away do you feel from that vision, assuming that they would agree with that vision, I give you the answer because what I've heard is that teachers still struggle in so many ways. And that's also because they struggle within their profession in terms of the sorts of time that they need to spend on certain things. Again, that 360-degree education that they're providing children that's really time consuming. It's wonderfully rewarding, can be very draining on some teachers. I know there's been various policies that are being put into place in the UK where they're trying to alleviate some of that. One was the changing Ofsted because of the pressure that puts on teachers, on head teachers, on senior leadership teams, on schools, on the community. But yeah, to answer it, we're not where we need to be. And I think that we need to work in all sorts of areas to try and make that number a little bit higher. But around the globe, you have other issues. That's the point. It's a complicated answer because you have different problems in different parts of the world.
What do you see as the role of AI in that future vision of education? What is AI doing to help us achieve that?
When one thinks of artificial intelligence technology, it is a tool, as I've said. And so it's what one has to do to answer it practically is to think that don't start from AI, start from what do we want to achieve? right? I always say to people, like, just forget the AI for a second. Write down all of the goals that you want to accelerate towards in education as a whole, per country, per type of school, whatever it is. And then write down all the problems that you need to solve because you know what they are, right? And then you go down the list of goals, and you go down, and the goals will have sub goals, like a typical strategy, right? And then you go down all the problems and you have a look at those and you say, can technology, digitization, artificial intelligence, can that solve any of these problems for me? Can it help accelerate us towards our goals? That's firstly what you need to do. Okay. And it's really important because otherwise you rush to using technology. It's a shiny new thing, everyone's using it, but that's where you end up in this sort of hype loop, right? Because you're excited by it, you get people with lots of confirmation bias, spending lots of time using this technology, and it's not working for you. The impact that you're going to get at the end of it is lucky if it does anything for you. So, firstly, figure out what it is that you need to be doing. There is a place, absolutely, for a personalized tutor for children. And that's what a lot of people are focused on developing. And this is a space where, when you're independently learning, you have a tool. Again, it's AI, it's technology, where you're able to ask it questions, use it for research, just like adults do today that are very familiar now with various chatbots, just like you would manually do when you're searching online for information, reading blogs, listening to podcasts. And it becomes that aggregator and analyst for you and explainer, that sort of teacher friend, if you like. There's definitely room for that. Of course there is. Some children may find deep and great comfort in having that available to them because they're not so ready to put their hand up in the class. And even if you are ready to put your hand up in the class, let's not forget the teacher doesn't have time for 30 hands in a period of 1 hour. So that will also happen. But the only thing I would caution against is this idea that sort of AI, which I think some educators do think is some sort of dystopian future, is going to replace the structure and the brick and mortar of a school, where, as I won't overlabour the point because I've explained it already, but education is not simply for that purpose. It provides so much more. On that point about the human and why the AI wouldn't necessarily take over, well, you don't really want it to. And what we sometimes don't think about is us humans, as wonderful as we are, Kai, but over reliance. The over reliance on technology and systems, it can be dangerous, right? And we've seen this with self-driving cars, for example, where people have been in a self-driving car, there's been an accident, and actually, upon analysis, post-accident, if the human had taken control of the car and really known what they were doing, and that's just requires someone who's got a driver's license who does know how to drive, it was avoidable. You've had that with the A330 Air France crash, where once the autopilot was essentially, switched off because the plane was in the middle of a thunderstorm, and the plane started stalling, the pilot didn't have the most basic pilot training and how not to stall a plane, and the plane sadly and very tragically crashed and killed everyone on board. Over reliance on a technology. And so this whole idea of AI being that sort of side gig, right, or maybe even a replacement of a teacher, well, you could end up in a world, and actually this is what I think is a really dystopian future, where humans are dumbed down and we're just relying on these systems to do everything. And if no one wants that. You don't want to end up with an education system where we're not teaching kids how to think, right? And this is why I think critical thinking is one of the most important skills that anyone could be focusing on in education now. And that leads to, before I go on to my second point, that leads on to my biggest passion, which is, it should be talking about AI and personalized education. Actually, it's talking about truth and trust and the world and the way you're used to today fundamentally changing, where you don't believe anything that your friends talk about, anyone that you trust is saying, fundamentally challenging democracies. And this is all about the fact that a third of people in the Western world certainly receive their news from social media channels. And here in a social media channel, where you're receiving your news, you're potentially getting the combination of two types of AI. You've got a classical AI that's giving you your feed, right, which is really capitalizing on trends at the moment, like what's trending right now, let's feed that to people, right? And also what you like. Yeah, so sort of keywords and key things that you're scrolling and stopping on and watching and reading, giving you more of that. So those are algorithms that are classical AI. They're learning and trying to predict what will Kai like to see because he'll stay engaged. And then the second type of AI, which is generative AI, where you've got bots and potentially quite nasty people creating fake news, and you've got all of this kind of coming together, and both things together give you a social media feed potentially full of fake news and disinformation, where you start to live in a world where you don't really know what reality looks like. And so critical thinking and teaching kids to learn, teaching adults to be more discerning about what they're reading and what is true versus untrue is really important. So there's that piece of over-reliance and ending up in this pretty nasty circumstance. And then the second one I wanted to talk about was sort of dopamine hits. So again, the idea of the personal tutor, I think, is a great one. I think it's brilliant if we could give every student a personal tutor on their side, when they're independently learning, that they could really enjoy utilizing. But what we've seen with social media and some gaming apps, and this is just based on some research, and I'm sure lots of people, that academics are doing research all over the place, and I'd love it if they posted their research as comments, because all of us can learn from this. And this is certainly just what I've read from what other people have produced, is this kind of quick response to questions that you're asking is feeding this sort of dopamine hit. And kids, particularly young adults too, are getting very, very hooked on these quick answers. Why is that relevant to where I'm trying to make the point is, we can have personal tutors, yes. They're not necessarily trained on just curriculum and educational material. If it's just a chatbot that could talk about anything, and it's constantly giving you those answers, and sometimes every so often it could hallucinate. As time goes on, these models will get better and better, and it will hallucinate less. But we're teaching children, again, that you're just going to get an instant gratification, that instant answer, that instant dopamine hit from everything. One of the key lessons that I learned when I was at school, when I went to university, when I read law, and I know that teachers are very familiar with this, is that investment in doing the research, doing the analysis, and that learning curve that you go through with certain subjects. Now, we really do need to consider what the impact would be if children are just asking short, sharp questions to something versus going through that journey themselves. It could be, there's many researchers out there that will say, no, this is the best way, and education actually ought to be that way. It will be phenomenal. It's great. Or the balance for access to education, good education, outweighs what I'm talking about right now. I don't know, but what I'm trying to say is that research needs to be done in that area, because what we know from the social media research that's been done and the gaming research is that it has a negative impact on young people particularly. So again, over reliance, this kind of instant gratification, quick dopamine hit from bots that people are getting used to, so they can't focus for a longer period of time. What are the true impacts of these when we're using and developing these sorts of technologies? And when you start talking about the ethical considerations of technology, I think that there is an onus on suppliers and companies developing this sort of stuff to be thinking about all of this and thinking, look, yes, you can make a quick buck selling this sort of technology over there, but should you? and being able to answer that, and being able to talk about the research, and having enough research to say, actually, no, we think this is the right way forward. So anyway, again, I don't have particular answers to all of these questions, which I apologize is frustrating, but these are all the things that I like to think about. And we have debates about at Century where we will not develop certain apps and features when we think we might be wrong, but we think that the overall impact of this is going to be negative. That is certainly something that we would not do.
Okay. So I think that picking up that point, certainly about the value of critical thinking. I'm going to be talking about that with another guest in a podcast shortly. But this bit about short attention span, I think
Mm.
speaking to teachers in my own school just this week, to a number of teachers from, teachers who are teaching students from 3 all the way up to 18, are already recognizing since COVID that the children in their classroom now in 2024 are different to the children, let's say, pre-COVID. And this short attention span is now something that we're having to think about as teachers when we're designing curriculum and designing the learning. That, how much do we, I guess, you sort of pander to that and say, okay, they're only going to be concentrated for 10, 15 minutes, or how do I counter that? Because I need to. It's important that we do develop better concentration spans in our children, and then you get people on a bigger scale. I think like Jonathan Haidt has written this book,
Yeah.
The
Anxious
Anxious
generation. Yeah.
Generation, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of lot of research and talk in that book about this very issue. Maybe one piece of advice would you give to a teacher who's a bit wary of using AI in their classroom?
Oh, channeling down to one piece of advice is hard. So I guess the first piece of advice I'd give to a teacher like that is I would honestly just try it. Try and use the platforms. Is if it was one piece of advice, I'd say try it, because you only know the extent as to how these things will help you or help your students by trying it, right? And it's not, the thing is, by trying some of these big platforms, trying Sentry, which is classical machine learning, plus there's natural language processing, and now we've got LLMs in there doing just various discrete features. You're not going to break those platforms, and they're not going to break you just by trying them out. And the thing is, you are the professional. You are the gatekeeper in that classroom. You could let these things in or out. You could let them in a way that you think, filter them and you think is appropriate. And you can chuck them out where you think they're inappropriate. And you can set rules. And so if you're that first teacher feeling anxious, I say try it, because the thing is, look, it boils down to they have phenomenal value in the right way. Phenomenal value. They're tools, and they're advanced 21st century tools that you could be using today, where you can then reap the rewards, and so can your students.
If I sent you my AI policy and you are looking at through the lens of AI and ethics,
Mhm.
what is what's the number one ethical consideration you would be looking out for that we've sort of covered or captured in that policy? What do you think's the biggest sort of ethical issue that
Oh,
a school policy should be
yeah.
trying to address? I'm
It's
putting you on the
really,
spot here
it's
now.
because you asked me for one, and I would say there are three. There are
Okay, well, give
three
us
that
three
I
then.
always
Give
say.
us three.
Give
Give
us
us three.
three.
Yeah.
Okay, because there are three, and I've looked at so many school AI policies in the last 6 months or so. I've had lots of head teachers sending me their AI policies. And actually, by the way, that's something that if you are an educator audience, share if you're happy to share your policy on LinkedIn, because
Yeah.
that's co-creation. Because people, yes, they might just nick your policy and say thank you very much, that's wonderful and how flattering, and you're helping lots of other educators and students. But actually what you'll find is there's quite a big community of educators on LinkedIn. I'm connected with a lot of them who are very, very interested in AI, very focused on mostly generative AI, to be fair. They're the application of Gen AI sort of experts in education, if you like. But the thing is that by sharing policies, you can better them together. And I think that's a really, really good idea. The technology is evolving, right? It's not a standstill technology. So I think that that's why co-creation is a really, really nice idea here. So the three areas that you asked for, right? The three key areas. There are lots of things that you need to talk about in your AI policy. You must cover three areas. The three areas are transparency, right? Maintain transparency about the use in the classroom. Right, think about it this way, Kai. If you want students at your school in Oman to be telling you when they use AI in their assignments, which you might well say, hey, that was allowed, that was great. But if you want them to tell you they're doing it, then you should tell them you're doing it too. Mirror what you want to see. So I have seen teachers in schools prior to the summer, when I do my various visits, saying, look, Priya, I'm doing this. And I said, that's great. And they love it. And I said, did you tell the kids that that's how you created that set of assignments, or, that piece of content? No. Well, you should, because the other thing that you'll benefit from is if you tell the kids you know what you're doing, they're less likely to cheat. They don't think
Yeah.
they're getting one over you. They'll tell you when they're using AI as
Yeah.
a source.
It's that cheating fear, isn't it? Sorry, it is that cheating
Yeah,
fear
that's what
that
people are worried about.
if I'm using AI, I'm cheating. And every time I say to one of my colleagues, "Look, can you have a look at this piece of writing?" And then I sort of smile and I sort of embarrassed smile, and I have ChatGPT'd it, or this is the Perplexity version. And yeah, we need to feel comfortable that AI plus human intelligence is actually what we're looking to achieve, and there's nothing shameful or wrong about that.
Look, what you're going to end up with, just to be very, very clear, there is no shame in using these tools to help your produce a piece of work that is better. And that is going to be the state of play. People had all these hang-ups and issues when the calculator was introduced. And actually, what they found was not that the mental arithmetic of children was ended up being worse. They found that they could do deeper math problems because they had a calculator to hand. So, what we want to end up with, your goal in 3 to 5 years as the educator using these tools in the classroom and with your teaching staff, is we want to use the tool. Yes, we want to use it ethically, and I'll go through the other two in a second. But we want the goal to be that we are able to teach better, that we get a deeper understanding and building
Yeah.
of our skills and our knowledge base. That's where you want to end up. So it's about being honest and true about it. Okay, so transparency, number one. So firstly, tell people you're using it when you're using it. Communicate it to students. Make sure you communicate it to parents. If you do not put parents in that policy, you're going to get parents writing to you and how you're using them. A really fantastic school policy that I saw very recently from Vicky Bingham, who's a brilliant head teacher, had, for example, a policy where students will be able to say that they'll give an assignment, a piece of homework, like I don't know what it was. It was like a code, it was like a number or is a color or whatever it was. And it said, okay, if it's this number, you're allowed to use AI fully. It's this number, you're allowed to use AI for this bit of research. If it's this one, you're not allowed to use AI at all. So you're getting that relationship back and forth with students. Then just openly sort of share with your stakeholders, like what are the limitations in using various systems, make sure the teaching staff know, and provide explanations as to how you're using AI in teaching and assessment in student reports or whatever you're doing. Obviously, do not put, and this is the second point from transparency, is accountability. Do not put student data into those systems. Please make sure you're not doing that, or any personal data into the systems. So accountability, what are the sort of data privacy and security considerations at the school, is establish clear policies and procedures for the use, who's accountable for AI assisted decisions and use in the school, implement regular audits, and create mechanisms for parents, students, and even your teachers to challenge or appeal any sort of AI generated content, wherever that is. Okay, so that's accountability. Done transparency, accountability. The third one is bias, right? So in terms of bias, you need to regularly assess the algorithms for potential biases. Why am I saying that? Because you're not all just using ChatGPT at the moment. Even when you are using chatbots, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Claude. Claude is brilliant, by the way. So you should look at Claude by Anthropic. I use it a lot, and but have a look at those systems and what questions you're asking it, and think it's trained with the World Wide Web of data. So I do the AI 101s where I sort of show teachers, educators, everyone, how does this stuff kind of work, so that after that you really gain an understanding of, I get the source data. And once you start to understand that, you can sort of start to see it's kind of common sense where biases may exist. Ensure that if you are developing any AI tools, there are some schools developing their own AI tools. They're fine-tuning large language models themselves. Ensure there's a sort of diverse representation in the development and the testing. Think about known biases and then try and mitigate those, test the systems against them. So Google Gemini example is a good one, Kai. So Google Gemini Pro came out. People were asking it for, give me an image of, what could have been an American president 30 years ago. And it came out with a black female president. And it's just like, look, what you can't have is a system where they'd actually kind of made the system try and represent so much that actually it was historically inaccurate. So test any systems that you're using with typical cases before you put them out into the field with students, with teachers. Make sure that they work, and make sure you have like a regular kind of review of that. So have someone responsible at school for doing that, and then monitor the outcomes and make sure that you're not disadvantaging certain groups of people. Yeah. So all of
Okay.
those are little tidbits under each of those three,
Well, that's
but those are
fantastic.
the three that you must have.
That's a really fantastic checklist, Priya. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
I don't think what you are inviting is for uh, teachers, colleagues, educators, head teachers, school leaders to send you policies for review. But
I,
what you are advocating is, as a professional community, let's share our policies
yeah,
on social media, on LinkedIn.
yeah.
And I know a number of, I mean, we've benefited from, I know International School Geneva, they were one of the first schools to share their policy this time last year. We found that brilliant. Thank you, Conrad Hughes. We've also had policies, we've borrowed them from other schools, and when we've got our policy approved in the next few weeks, we will be sharing that. I think that's a really great idea, and let's do some self-review, let's say
Yeah.
co-creation.
This is about not waiting for regulation to catch up as well,
Mm,
because regulation chases innovation. And, you know, waiting for policy to protect schools is, you'll be a long way away. Also, schools have different opinions as to how far they want to use this technology. And those differences are valid, right? They're really valid. So, share them, co-create them. As I said, this area is evolving rapidly. You'll have the year of sort of very accessible multimodal AI soon. It's not going to be far away where you'll be creating more kind of videos, longer format videos and things like that. And so as you see that evolves, you'll need to have your AI policy will need to link to your bullying policy, vice versa. Already you can create images of peers and not very nice images on various platforms. You can create those off the main platforms on other platforms that most people don't know about, which I'm not going to talk about today. But there's a lot of nasty stuff that happens. So in your school, are you saying categorically that no student is going to do that with another student? Is there a policy for that? Has it been explicit? Has it been talked about in assembly? We've had some horror stories of some really tragic cases where
mm.
students have been bullied. So I'm just saying that this evolves, and you want the least negative impact from the technology. So yet you want to use it in a really positive way and take advantage of all the opportunities. So this is why co-creation and sharing is really, and by the way, I think educators, it's one of the professional areas and sectors where they're fantastic at sharing.
Yeah.
Teachers share a lot with each other. So, there's no sort of, you don't ever see teachers saying, no, that's mine, I'm not going to share that. They share lesson plans, they share content, they share all sorts of stuff.
Mm.
So this is an area where I think you can have a fantastic community doing it for the rest. And then obviously, just the only thing, just it would be remiss of me not to say, Kai, but obviously some of you are operating in different countries. So just ensure that whatever you are using is compliant. So if you're in, for example, the Middle East, you need to ensure that when you're producing content using generative, so for example, at Century, we have content and then we have to align that to various curricula, right? Because certain things are not allowed. And just be very, very careful, because if you're using, let's say, a platform that is based in the US, developers are based in the US, they're not necessarily going to be looking out for images and text that are compliant with particular educational policies in certain countries. So because I know you're in Oman, and there are people elsewhere, just make sure that you're careful about that. You wouldn't inadvertently want to breach one of those
No, no.
policies just because you've copied and pasted something and not read it properly and stuck it on some,
Okay.
resource website.
It's fantastic advice, and people who know me will have heard me say this before, but I think it's really important that as educators, we understand really that education policy tends to follow practice. And I think, as you've just explained, you know, establishing AI policies, sharing those with each other, making those better and better, that's really an opportunity for the educational community to demonstrate what we can do in schools, and we can
Yeah.
create really robust policies, and then let ministries and so on take those and adopt them, and let's lead the way there, and we can do that through this sharing and co-creation. So we've been on a fantastic odyssey around the world or universe of sort of AI and the world of education. We've been far and wide, and we've also got into some practicalities as well. Just to finish off on this odyssey, and we're still, I would say, in the very early steps of this journey. What is your best hope on what AI might be able to do for education, and what's your worst fear?
The best hope for me, because I do fundamentally believe teachers are so important in education, because I could talk about students all day long, and I've got so many areas where it could be great there, is that it frees up the teacher. I want to free up teachers to do what they signed up to do. Because if you could do that, I think the common denominator of education is teachers. They're teachers. And
Yeah.
so bring them up to do the grunt work so they can focus on their human intelligence side more. That's my hope. What could it do that would be terrible? I think it could destroy trust in society. For me, that is what it could do very easily, what it's already doing. You saw that in the Middle East last year when there were authentic images posted. People said that they were fake. That's the liar's dividend. When you then start to not even trust authentic things. Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem. And that's why I think that we need to focus on that skill of teaching our students, young people and adults, be very discerning about what you're reading and where it's from and the sources of information, and become very smart about where you start, about stating something as fact and where it's from.
So that comes back to the critical thinking piece, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
And we've had loads of advice, absolutely shed load of advice. Fantastic. So if there was one piece of advice to school leaders you could offer that would help secure your best hope of freeing up teachers, what would you want to be advising or encouraging school leaders to be doing over the next year or so?
I would say take that list of the thing that you could do for you, because it has to make sense in your specific institution, your school, right? Is draw up that list in your strategy of your goals and your problems, and then look at where could technology, artificial intelligence technology, help me in these specific areas, and then reach out to the people that offer those and try them out. That's it. You'll be the best judge of whether it works for you or not. Your teachers will be. That's all you need to do. And it's not just you in education doing that. I speak to corporates all the time who aren't in education, who want to create efficiencies in their businesses. They want to increase their revenue. They want to decrease their costs. You know, their game is completely different. It's not the opportunity and choice of every child in the world, which is a much bigger, more important metric. They're focused on money. Now, what they're doing is developing an AI strategy, just like you are. But again, how do you do that? What are the problems? What are the goals? How could this be disruptive, right? For me, for my customers, for the way in which I operate. And then just look at the technology. And the hope is to free up teacher time, because that's the bit that I'd focus on. How can I empower my people? Because it's all about people. Leadership it's all about people, right? And how do I do that and create efficiencies where I can? Again, where can AI help? Post a LinkedIn post of the problems and the goals of education and tag me in the podcast, the Kai's podcast on it, and I'll tell you exactly where machine learning in one form or another could help you in certain areas. That's what you need to do, or empower a member of your staff to do that. And you don't need to understand what AI specifically, you just need to know your problems and your goals, which all of you do very, very well. And then go to someone who understands AI, machine learning, and it's not just generative AI, there's non-generative AI as well, and say, right, where can machine learning, ML, help me in these areas? Okay, find me some people who could provide me with those and put in a phased plan.
Okay, we're now got to the bottom lining round.
Oh yeah.
So this is yeah, sounds good, doesn't it? So which is where we're looking for concise and to the point answers.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and we're just looking for, say, concise and to the point answers. One word's okay, but no more than a sentence.
Hard for me with ADHD, isn't it? But let's go.
It's very hard, isn't it? It's very hard for lots of us. So here we go. Question number 1. Are you ready for the bottom lining round, Priya?
Yes.
You're ready. Okay, here we go. The biggest leadership lesson that you keep on having to learn.
Keep on having to learn. Okay, that's hard. It's just always about the people. Makes me sound like a lemming. I have to keep on learning the same lesson. The biggest leadership lesson I keep on having to learn is keep on having to learn the same lesson. Make changes. That's my lesson.
Okay. Question 2 then. A key moment in your leadership journey that made you think or lead differently.
COVID.
And it changed your leadership thinking in what way?
During a time of crisis, you lead differently. And you have more time for, I like to think of myself as a compassionate leader. I think most of my team hopefully would vouch for that. More compassion, communication. You can tell I communicate. I know how to communicate. I over communicate. If you think you're over communicating during a time of crisis, you're probably still not doing it enough. Yeah. So there's all these lessons from a crisis period, which I hope we never have to go through again. But you lead very differently during times of crisis. Yeah.
Absolutely. What's your favorite way to unwind at the end of a day, end of a busy day as CEO of Century Tech?
Being ADHD, my brain actually never stops thinking, though I don't have a way to unwind. I just do something different. So I'll read the news. Well, I obviously read the news a lot because of what I do on Thursday evenings, but yeah, I'll just do something different. I'll probably be learning. I'll probably be doing an online nano degree on something like psychology or philosophy or
okay.
That's I know it's really annoying. That's my way of. Can you imagine my husband's life? Poor guy.
Okay. Change as good as the rest, sounds like. Leadership is
multifaceted.
Excellent. Very good. And finally, the purpose of education should be to
empower students with opportunity and choice to do whatever they want to do.
Who needs ChatGPT when you've got Priya Lakhani?
I don't know. I feel a little bit like I should go and type that into something. And yeah, I don't know. I just want everyone to be happy and respectful and tolerant, I suppose. I don't know. I'm not the right person to ask all those wonderful, profound questions to, but thank you for asking me. Yeah, I default to my educators, to people like you on things like that.
Well, I think you've answered those brilliantly. So we're going to bring it to an end there, Priya. Thank you so much, because I know you're so busy. You're running a company, doing all sorts of other things. But thank you for taking us on an amazing journey through the world of AI and how it might impact education at a very high level. Also, right down to in the classroom, we've talked about policy, and you've given us loads to think about, loads of practical advice. So we're just really, really grateful for today. And I'm also really grateful for what you're doing in the world of education. And you've set out your vision at the start of this podcast. It's very bold, it's very ambitious. And we need people like you to help us move our education systems and our schools into even better places. So thank you for today, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you for everything that you do. And I love working with you and learning from you, Kai, and all of your colleagues. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Priya. Take care. You've been listening to the Educators Corner podcast, the show that brings you conversations with educators from all over the world, the podcast where we stay curious for just a little bit longer. The Educators Corner podcast is hosted by me, Kai Vasher, and produced by Stuart Pardoe, Zoe Snell, and Marion James, and by BSM BSS Productions.